questions and answers. We have another 15 minutes. And I guess, Chris, coming back to your point, one of the questions is that how hard is it actually to implement these off-block time predictions, or the predictions in general, into your operational processes at an airport? I understand that these operational processes are often like developed or have been developed over many years, and that there needs to be quite some or that there are quite some efforts required to change them.
So the answer, it depends a little bit on the current situation, but I think what is a very good thing, and what makes the transition to the use of these kind of technologies in many cases relatively easy, is that a lot of airports have already adopted ACDM best practices, not only in Europe, but also in the US and in Asia. We see it quite a lot. And the interesting part is that often there is component like a target off-block time, which is currently an estimation that the ground handler gives when he thinks he's going to be ready with the aircraft. It already exists, and we don't want to change everything around that. We just want to swap these two things. And it's even interesting that we don't even want to make the target off-block time, for example, disappear, because there's a lot of interesting information in this target off-block time as an ingredient into the predictor. So we actually use the TOBT, but not as the final product, but as an ingredient to create a prediction that is then just fed into the process as it's already there. So obviously that's the easiest way, and for airports that are not yet using these kind of concepts, there's a ton of best practices from the airports that are doing that. So in many cases it can be very smooth and seamless, and in some cases required, but there's a good approach.
Thanks a lot, Chris. One more question for Vincent. According or from, in your opinion, what is kind of the required planning horizon for the departure management process? So for example, for runway assignment, and for off-block times, and so on and so forth.
Thanks, Jan. That's an interesting question indeed. That's all the point about planning. When you are at the ATC position and you have to decide, for example, to which runway an aircraft has to go, it's not something you can do 2 minutes before off-block or 5 minutes before off-block, because the pilot has to be informed. You have to plan a taxi route. You have to integrate the capacity for that aircraft taxiing on certain taxiways. So if the dis-knowing people tell you, oh, that runway will be closed in 5 minutes, it does not really help you, because you have aircraft that are already taxiing to that runway, and you have aircraft that are already knowing they will go to that runway. And same thing, if your capacity and the structure you have available changes all the time, you cannot really plan. So ideally, I would say, to come back to a number 30 to 45 minutes ahead, it's a good way. And that's roughly what we have in Europe in ACDM airports. So you do decision and you do planning 40 to 30 minutes ahead of the TOBT. Otherwise, you're not planning, you are running after reality.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot, Vincent. I guess that answers the question. Is there any more, or are there any more questions from the floor? Otherwise, I thank our 3 panelists for their time today, for their insights. I thought it was a very, oh, sorry. There is actually one. Oh yeah, that, I guess, Chris, that goes into your direction. Are there any thoughts from the panel in general, but I guess, Chris, on how to get the cameras placed in view of de-ice pads? So this is for remote de-icing on de-ice pads. Very good question.
Yeah, we've obviously have to answer this question, not just for de-icing pads, but in general, also for remote stands. And typically at airports, in almost every case so far, there is some sort of infrastructure present, either buildings or light masts that are good locations to put cameras. So it depends. We'd have to take a look. But I would expect us to find something like a light mast or something similar. In a worst case situation, a pole could be placed to mount a camera into. But it's also good to know sometimes connectivity in terms of network infrastructure at remote sites might be more difficult. There are also solutions from our side where we offer 4G cameras or cameras tied to edge processing units that have 4G connectivity in order to also connect cameras that are not directly at a terminal building. So there's some pretty good solutions for that.
Yep.
Jan, if you don't mind, I'd like to complement on that.
Sure.
Actually, most airports have hundreds, if not thousands, of cameras already in place, and some can provide good quality already.
That's actually true, and most of the de-icing pads that I have seen in my life, I have to say, it's not like hundreds or dozens, but at least the ones I have seen at least have, as Chris said, some kind of external structure, like often lamp masts in order to lit the area, because winter operations appear in winter where most of the day it's rather dark. And so there's normally the infrastructure available that is required in order to attach some kind of cameras. And then there's also, as Chris said, the possibility to have completely independent cameras from any cabling or networking in order to work on there. There's one more question. Does anyone see a need for FLIR, FLIR, or other enhanced vision in order to apply the video analytics?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what exactly FLIR means. Do any of the other panelists can help me out?
FLIR would be infrared, right? So it would be not just visual, but infrared visioning. And I guess maybe expand the question to LiDAR as well, right? So if we forget about just visual cameras as we use for kind of human view and think about machine vision, are some of those other sensors, whether it's infrared or other imaging systems, going to be needed, I think is where the question comes from.
Yeah, nighttime and low visibility considerations.
So I can only draw on our current experience where we have not seen the need for any other than RGB sensor, so just regular camera, which worked pretty well for these cases. So maybe if we go down this path and get into more specifics, potentially, but I don't think so right now.
I could comment something on that as well. Infrared at an airport is not always easy. I've been involved in a project using these technologies lately. And one of the issues you have is that the ramps are usually heavily lit. And if your camera is on the terminal building and has to go via infrared through that heavily lit ramp, it's not as good as infrared just in normal night.
All right.
Interesting.
We are now getting some more questions, and I think there's one question that I particularly like because it's a little bit of it's a tricky question. So thanks, Jose Sanz Dodero. He says it has been a very interesting panel, but don't you think that we need to accept that winter operation is basically always going to be a critical process and that there will be delays and cancellations? And if it will not be more useful to cancel flights in advance in order to avoid passenger problems in the terminal?
Maybe I'll start on that one. I think it's an excellent question, right? And I think, as I said earlier, we have to accept that there's going to be some implications from weather, right? Winter weather will reduce runway capacity, will reduce airport capacity, will require additional processes, and as a result, capacity will go down overall. And if we have busy airports that are scheduled to capacity, as we do in the US, we schedule them even tighter than in Europe. There will be delays when we run into the reduced capacity. Now, the question is, how much does this capacity have to be reduced, and how much do we accept it? And then on the other hand, how early can we be in finding mitigating measures? So on the first question, how much does the capacity have to be reduced? I think we've discussed a few cases here now where we are reducing capacity by too much, and we're creating some gaps that could be filled, either because we have poor planning or poor coordination, or we just don't deal well with the uncertainty. And so deploying some methodologies out there and solutions to just take advantage of all the available capacity, I think will help. And so that should reduce delays to some degree. And then I think to the other point, which is an excellent one, which is if we get better forecasting and better prediction and can be better in proactively canceling flights, consolidating flights, rescheduling flights, that'll minimize the customer impact as well. But fundamentally, we're dealing with an uncertainty here, right? Because even the best AI at times is not going to be able to truly predict, every snowstorm coming through, every micro environment like an airport and the impact it will have. So there's always going to be some uncertainty we'll have to buffer for, and some surprises we'll have. But I think with more technology, we can minimize those impacts. And I think an interesting follow-up study here would be to really understand how much of the reduced capacity can we gain back with better systems, and how much can we really predict and therefore proactively plan if we deploy all these tools. I don't have a great number of that, and not even a good gut feel, but I would think the number is material.
Thanks, Robin. I think also it's a very good question, because in the end we will never get to a zero delay world. So there is always a cost-benefit analysis to be done. Maybe there are now 2 more questions, but I think we only have time for one more. So Sergio, we will get back to you about your questions. Sorry for not being able to answer today, but we got 2 questions that are kind of circling around weather, and so I would like to combine these 2. So from Wahid Hesare, the question is, predicting weather accurately is key in the whole process, which is definitely a right statement. What is the state of the art of weather prediction at airports? And that goes in line with a question from an anonymous visitor. Perhaps the root cause analysis of the overall problem would bring us back to the issue of weather itself. Any thoughts on weather modification efforts such as cloud seeding, etc., to remove one of the elements that are required to make snow? That's definitely an interesting idea. And I think if I remember correctly, actually in Russia, they use some of these methods in order to have nice weather when there are important events. But I'll give it back to the floor. I think that the basic question is like, what is state of the art in weather prediction and weather detection, so to say, and are there possibilities to actually influence the weather on a very local area?
Okay, I can give a try at that and then hand over to Robin. First, the issue is that we are really talking about very, very local activity here. An airport on one side is large, but it's also not that large. So if you have a large snow event on your airport, or let's say 5 kilometers away, which in terms of weather prediction is very small, it makes a big difference for you. And the second thing on cloud seeding, and so that's something we use in some parts of Switzerland to, in another context, to prevent thunderstorms. Because if the water comes down brutally in a thunderstorm, it can create damage. And with cloud seeding, you can try to, and insisting on trying to, have it coming down earlier and in a more controlled way. But with snow, the problem is that it will come down anywhere and bring you into trouble. So I'm not seeing a lot of chances with cloud seeding here, at least with what we are doing now, but maybe Robin has different views on that.
Yeah, I'm not a meteorologist, and I don't have a good view of how we can manipulate the weather, especially when we're talking about large weather when it's snowstorms. I think that seems more difficult. But I think, look, on the first point around the state of the art of weather forecast, I think we've made some progress by leveraging data, but the granularity is still not quite there, right? Even at a local airport, you're depending on radars that might sit quite a bit away for weather information, and you're depending on sensors that might not update in real time. And then you might not have a local processing unit. And there's a couple of big players who process the data, but do it at a larger scale. I think there's a few startups that are promising in this space that are focused on micro weather, and have seen some airlines invest in some of these startups because they think there is a real use case here to deal with winter operations for one. And so I do think in the next couple of years, we will see more, call it pop-up sensors show up around cities and around airport facilities to provide additional data. And we'll see some of the micro weather players starting to predict much more precise, much more granular, both in geography and in timing of what's going to happen with these events. But we're not quite there yet, but the first trials look quite encouraging.
Great, thanks, Robin. That's good input, and I think, yeah, cutting or getting rid of the problem at the source, at least understanding the problem better at the source, is probably one of the key things that we have to look at when we speak about winter operations first. All right, having a look at the time, again, we will get back to the remaining open question. Thanks for asking it. Here's an overview how you can contact our panelists today. I would like to thank Robin and Vincent and Christian very much for the time and insights today. It's been a pleasure. I thank every attendee today for their time. I hope you learned something new, and I hope it was worthwhile your time. And next month, we will not have our regular Reboot Aviation webinar, but we will do a virtual panel discussion where we have 6 or 8 of our Reboot Aviation partners attending. And we will also open the floor for all attendees to ask questions and to discuss. And we will basically have a 1.5 hour session and look back into on 2020 and see if it was simply an annus horribilis that really hurt the aviation industry, or if there maybe also was some kind of a opportunity for the aviation industry to kind of speed up the innovation process in order to become more efficient and more resilient to these outside shocks. And with that, I'll leave you to it. Thanks again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.